welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're new to my art channel. I'm quite a slow artist and I thought I'd just document the realistic process of painting, sketching, planning new illustrations, and maybe if you too feel like you're going a bit too slow sometimes, we can sit down, sketch and paint together. So join me as I slowly sketch, plan, have an art haul in which I buy way too much paper, and learn more about both starting and finishing complex illustrations. And also ask myself if filming for YouTube actually hinders my art process. But let's chat about that later in the video. The painting that had consumed all my free time for a few weeks has showed up in previous sketchbook sessions. I'd been rereading the Silmarillion and started a series of illustrations inspired by the story of Lúthien. This second one was a challenge to myself, to really dig deep into my art process, to see how I can make every step flow naturally into the next one, and finish a scene illustration without taking forever. Not being a fast, or more importantly, spontaneous artist has long been a bit of a complex of mine. Part of that might be imposter syndrome. No muses seem to ever come to me striking me with inspiration, so I could immediately start painting and create from nothing. I don't know why my younger self believed that all artists had to work like that. Maybe an illusion created by social media, an idealized view of the process. There are artists that truly create like that, but I needed time to accept that I work much better when I take it slow, prepare, problem solve, and tinker around before even touching a brush. How is your process? Do you create thumbnail sketches and studies, or just dive in? Do you have a concrete idea before you sit down to paint, or just go with the flow? I'd be really curious to hear how everyone approaches this, and how they feel about it, or if you want to change anything in the future. This painting shows Lúthien and Juan, the wolfhound, after they defeat Sauron at Tol in Gaurhof. Lúthien banishes him, and I wanted the composition to make her feel like a force of nature, dominating the painting. Everything is framing her, the textiles guiding our eyes towards her from every corner of the painting. The camera angle is low, making her tower over the defeated Sauron, hunched on the ground. Even the falling tower in the background is an extension of her form to emphasize her power here. Juan frames her, adding more bulk and contrast to her silhouette, as the two of them melt into a single shape at first glance. I tried to be really intentional with every part of the composition here. I found that for this Lúthien illustration here, every second I put into the preparation really was worth it. I had thumbnail sketches to figure out the composition, color tests, I created 3D references with those sketches in mind, and then even drew studies to get a better sense of the expression and lighting of the portrait and of the character design. While this is a slower approach, it really doesn't take that long. An extra study here, 30 minutes more spent sketching stick figures there, is much less daunting than the actual painting, which can take me so much longer. When I finally got to the point of putting Lufian's drawing to paper, I felt more secure in my approach. I knew roughly what colors I'd want to use, where the focus should be, and while the painting wasn't all smooth sailing from there, I believe it really did help me, all the same. Lately, I've been asking myself some existential questions about filming art for YouTube. How much of the process should we capture? When is filming a helpful documentation, and when does it become a distraction? I love capturing little moments of my art process, especially with travel sketchbooks or when practicing new techniques or testing out art supplies. There, the filming feels like a celebration of the process. It gives me structure, accountability, and I find myself looking at the world more attentively. Here, I was on the way back from a doctor's appointment and just wanted to spend a moment sketching before going back to work. And a lonely tree in the middle of the city caught my eye growing at a busy crossroad just outside the cafe. In a way, filming short snippets of that simple sketch process was meditative, with the filming an extension of the creative process. But back at home, especially while painting with acrylics which dry so quickly, I often struggle with setting up a camera to capture my process, and what felt meditative became intrusive. I get absorbed by color mixing and layering my paints as quickly as I can, and forget to adjust camera angles or to make sure the recording is still going and the battery not empty. When I sat down to edit my footage of the painting process, that's when I realized how little of it I had filmed. I'd gotten so absorbed into trying to make this illustration good and seemed to have blanked on filming more often than not. And so I had to ask myself, how important is that? Where should my priority be? On me focusing on the painting, on giving my best, or the behind the scenes of filming, camera angles, sometimes even waiting for better lighting instead of just painting late at night? I sometimes caught myself thinking, oh, I should wait to paint this detail in the morning so I can film it under better lighting. And even the other day, is it worth painting this if I don't film it? And I was quite shocked how those thoughts snuck into my brain. I've talked to some other artists in the past about the filming process, be it for short-form videos like Reels or long-form for YouTube. And with how time-consuming the process of filming and editing is, but also the setup, the considerations of lighting, there really seems to be a trade-off that every artist has to consider. I had to sit with that for a while. I think that except for specific tutorials or material reviews, I'd rather focus on creating more and better art than filming better videos. For me, filming sketchbook sessions, art hauls, and experiments comes so much easier and let me experiment more with camera angles and fun editing than trying to interrupt the deep work of actual painting processes. I really hope this makes sense and doesn't sound dismissive. Sketchbook sessions, on the other hand, are so much easier to film. I sat down one night to collect vague ideas I had floating around my mind. While I have a lot of larger projects ahead, especially client projects for books that I'm really excited about, I wanted to sketch out simpler painting ideas that I could work on in between others. Despite what a lot of my practice videos here on YouTube might suggest, I've actually not painted that many portraits lately. I've been more focused on larger illustrations of often multiple characters interacting, and I really miss the simplicity and emotional connection of portraiture. Here I was playing around with two different series to dabble in. One would be a series of Dragon Age character portraits. I'm a longtime fan, and drawing fan art is really relaxing in between work. It's a familiar world with a lot of design choices already presented to us on a silver platter. For portraits like these, I could play around with symbolism the games have established. Wolves, green light, the city of Kirkwall, or a dragon's maw framing the portraits. That can be very comforting and lets me focus on other parts of the process. How to adapt those elements into my own art style, the compositions, fun portrait angles or lighting, and just the technical painting process. I'm tentatively calling this series The Martyrs, and I'm going for a triptych format. For something a bit more involved, but still part of an established world, new Dracula art. It's now been half a year since I wrapped up my last illustrations for the windows into Dracula art scene. And honestly, I miss it. The novel is this wonderful blend of historical, epistolary tale and dark, monstrous forces. The novel starts on May 3rd with a diary entry by Jonathan Harker, and with that day fast approaching, I really wanted to get back to some gothic horror, vampires, and drawing the main characters of the story. For this novel, which is in the public domain, I'd already come up with my own versions of the characters from all my previous illustrations, but here I want to go for a more realistic portrait style rather than the highly stylized fantasy approach I'd taken previously. For all of these illustrations, no matter if the portraits or even some of the client work I've got coming up, my goal nowadays is to go a bit smaller. Not in my effort or levels of detail, but in the most literal sense of the word. I'd painted several really large illustrations over the winter and they take me forever. The new Luthien painting is already part of that exploration of smaller formats. It's less than half the size of my previous Silmarillion illustration. And while there are, of course, limitations due to that, the sheer amount of time I saved by going smaller surprised me. The two larger portrait sketches were more study than composition sketch, where I wanted to figure out lighting choices and flesh out the character designs. This is why I like sketching with colored pencils after that initial composition stage. I can tackle some of the vague ideas I have for color palettes or lighting with them, before moving on to the actual painting. This might turn out to be my longest art vlog yet. I've really come to embrace all these parts that make up the preparation of a painting and then the process even that comes after completing one. And I've embraced that I will never be the fastest of artists. So maybe a long art vlog is kind of thematic for that. I hope that maybe you can bring out your own sketchbooks, doodle ideas for compositions, make ugly stick figure sketches to plan paintings, or draw a study so that the actual illustration will come more easily. We're so often forced to create so much to constantly update and show new work, when really the process demands time and especially also consideration that sometimes this faster speed would just eliminate. I'm still learning how to strike that balance of quicker sketches, of documenting my process and sharing all the thoughts that go into a piece. And I hope that if you too sometimes feel a bit slow or uninspired, seeing my own quite deliberate and maybe boring process can motivate you to just embrace that and go with what suits you naturally. And if you are a very spontaneous, always inspired and creative artist, I'd actually love to hear from you, because maybe I can still get some of that for my own life as well. I'm coming off a bit of an intense time with work, and so I was flipping back through my sketches and trying to figure out what personal piece I want to tackle next. I always try to have one personal, larger painting to work on in my downtime. And this is a realistic look at what my sketches look like. At first they are barely stick figures, they're more scribbled silhouettes. These are just ways for me to keep track of ideas I had. A long time can go by before I have time to tackle something new, though I always want to make sure I don't lose anything. These are some ideas for personal world building, for like a fantasy setting that I have, but you can also see that Luffy painting. There's like an early sketch variant of it here. This silhouette is supposed to be Luffy, and this weird shape is supposed to be a dog, and this sad triangle is Sauron. And honestly, thinking of weird shapes, sad triangles, chaotic lines is actually exactly how I like to approach composition. Here's that earlier study of Luffy. Another pretty realistic look at my sketchbook. At the core of things are always little thumbnail sketches, and here I have that Juan and Luffy piece from the horizontal format to this vertical, more destabilized and dynamic composition. And then I think weeks later is when these other sketches happened on top. They are quite recent actually. For the image to have a clear line from sunlit to cast in shadow, and her arm breaching that gap and reaching to the soul or spirit of Baron. Yeah, so that's how my sketches usually go. I just go to an old page sometimes, see an old sketch for something else, and then kind of connect from that. And I think it's important to keep in mind that sketchbooks can really be workbooks. There are even rougher versions of this up here, and I think I even sketched. I just saw that one a couple pages ago. Yeah, there's even like early versions of this same motif up here. A lot of repeating themes. I'm in the mood for some simpler paintings as well. I definitely want to do that Luffy piece, but I do have a lot of client work for some really fun projects coming up for book illustrations, book covers. And since those are client works, I can't really document them, but I do want to have something smaller to work on in the background, and for that I would love to do either something Dragon Agey. Over here you can see that I've already been working on more Dracula stuff. Dracula Daily is a chronological companion to Bram Stoker's Dracula, sending you emails with the characters' letters and diary entries as they happen, date by date. So different from the original reading order of the book. A portrait of each character, and while I here have Mina and Lucy, Westenra, sketched out most prominently, and a sketch of Mina here, it would make sense to go with our boy Jonathan Harker first, because he's the one opening pretty much the book. I've heard from several people, both here in YouTube comments and with some wonderful private messages on Patreon, that they enjoy when I show my sketchbook as the workbook it is, no matter if it's my watercolor sketchbook or this one. So just to give you another insight maybe, this isn't in chronological order. These sketches were here for a while. These sketches over here, just thumbnail sketches for a different project, happened literally last night. So you can tell that I'm kind of hopping back and forth. I don't always feel the need to start a new page for a new project. There was some empty space here to fill. I sketched these, moved on to completely different stuff like the Asaro studies I had shared in a previous video. Did some other things I can't really show yet, and then went back a couple days ago to look at these sketches and draw my first portrait studies for the painting. And I feel like it's good for us to just let go of this idea that a sketchbook has to be going from A to B, and that's our art journey. We can mix it up. You don't always have time to dedicate yourself completely to a project until it is finished, and it is fine to take a step back and come back later. These were the early sketches for that Luffy series. Here again you can see Juan. It can really be good to just take a step back, work on something else, and then return to an old idea and rework it. I tried to break out of my usual comfort color palette of mostly blue tones. Luthien is traditionally shown clothed in blue, so that was actually quite the challenge. But I went with a deep teal, viridian green color scheme so that she'd feel more like a force of life and nature than with a calmer blue. And then Sauron, in contrast, is in this terracotta red shade. I wanted to avoid actual blood for this post-combat scene, and in a way the draping cloak takes the place of that, pooling on the ground. Design-wise, I avoided the bulky, spiky dark armor of the later ages, and also as shown in the movies, Sauron here is still a servant of Morgoth, and so I wanted him to look more vulnerable. There were a lot of fun small design choices for this. Luthien's costuming has influences from Korean traditional clothing, and the embroidery on her costume is inspired by the even star pendant Arwen wears in the movies. I just enjoy small details like that in my otherwise pretty straightforward fantasy paintings, and I like to pick apart text elements to find inspiration. Again, I love filming and have found it valuable to see my own work through a camera lens, reflecting on what I'm doing instead of just rushing from painting to painting. But I don't want to fall into the trap of every aspect of the process having to be filmed and dissected. Maybe if you film your process for Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, you've encountered that same dilemma. What's important in the end, I'm really happy with how this Silmarillion illustration turned out. It even marked a shift in how I treat my finished pieces, as I wanted to preserve it better and present it more professionally than my usual loose paper sheets. I mounted the paper on panel after the painting was finished. I'm using GAC 100 as a sealant to make sure the MDF panel doesn't deteriorate or interact with the painting. You could use the GAC as an adhesive too, as I tried out here. But for now I am sticking with acrylic soft gel. That one acts as really potent glue and held down my Luthien painting perfectly, despite all the warping the paper went through. For me, panels with paper or canvas mounted to them is the best of both worlds. They are sturdy, yet still easy to store. I get both the surface I want to paint on and the solidity of a panel. Here you can see the finished Luthien painting. I actually just bounded it on panel the other day. It looks really nice, I have to say, and there's an isolation coat on it, and once that is completely dry, I will varnish it with a matte finish. While I kept the blue textiles blank in the actual painting, for the embellished print version, I do add star constellation patterns. Again hinting at twilight and maybe some elven magic. The print, as well as the bookmark and sticker with the same motif, are my Patreon rewards for April, so there are still a few days left to sign up if you'd like to get this set. Seeing how Luvian looked on this panel immediately made me want to create my next illustration like this too. Though I will be switching up surfaces thanks to a recent paper art haul that got way out of hand. I did a little material art haul focused on painting surfaces. As I really enjoy all of my Hanemühle sketchbooks, I did give some of their watercolor paper a closer look and went with their bamboo, agave and the pure cotton watercolor cold pressed paper. Because I realized I have watercolor sketchbooks with cold pressed paper, but I don't actually own that much paper just in sheet form. I've already used the bamboo paper and I have to say I quite like it. It has a really beautiful texture. I wouldn't want to do elaborate painting just on this. For that I'd want to stretch a paper, but to just layer a couple colors. This was wonderful. I'm quite fascinated by the texture because it's not completely smooth by any means, but the texture is quite fibery, if that makes any sense, compared to these more visible dents that a cold pressed paper can have. This is the Arch cold pressed sketchbook that I have, and you can really see the highs and lows, so to say, the peaks and valleys of that paper. The texture of the bamboo paper here, with the same lighting, you can't really see any of those peaks and valleys going. It's quite even. These subtle fiber textures here that kind of often go in diagonal lines crossing each other. So it's not as smooth as a hot press, but I've also found it less textured or less visibly textured than a cold press. I don't usually go specifically for ring bindings. They can be a bit annoying if you're wanting to draw something on the left side. But for a watercolor paper where I don't usually paint as much on both sides or keep the main illustrations here and then kind of just sketches on the back side on the left, I've usually never found it to be an issue. And this also feels less like a sketchbook and more like a sketch pad where I can tear out individual pages if I might feel like it. Because it's a sketch pad, it's lightweight compared to the much heavier travel sketchbooks that one can get on some trips, especially while hiking. I might like to have something like this with me. It's even called a carnet de voyage. I had never noticed that before. I am a bit of an idiot. So there we go. It's exactly what I want to use it for, and I like the extra wide format. Really happy with this little experiment. Like I mentioned, I own several sketchbooks with watercolor paper, 2 by Arch, the hot press one in a smaller size, and this cold pressed one, and then my newer watercolor A4 sketchbook by Hanemühle, because I liked that particular one so much. That's why I'm reaching for more and more Hanemühle products. Which brings me to the second one I bought from the Natural line. I saw it recommended on Instagram by an artist I really like, Chiara in the Forest. I asked her if she's working on hot press paper or cold press paper because her illustrations looked so smooth, her watercolor art, and she mentioned this paper as her recommendation. So this is 30% cotton rag and 70% agave fiber. Strangely, it opens kind of like a book. So again, this is part of the Natural line, and this one is completely glued down, so this is an actual watercolor paper pad. The texture is really interesting. It has again this fibery texture, not the pressed patterns of a cold pressed cotton rag paper. I'd be really curious if you've tried some of these papers, as there's also a hemp paper, and the bamboo mixed media paper that I have also has a bamboo sketch variant. This is a traditional aquarelle cold pressed paper, so pure cotton, and I'm mostly just curious to try something new. I've been using Fabriano papers for a long while. Both of these papers that I now have here from Hanemühle are acid-free, don't use any animal products. This one is 100% cotton, and this has like a sustainability pledge badge here. I have to say I really like this black copper combination, the black backing board as well. I'm sometimes a bit of a sucker for nice product design or nice packaging. It comes with this semi-transparent cover page here, and then the actual paper has a quite uneven texture. That might sound negative, but actually for cold pressed papers, I really like when the indents aren't just patterned out in a grid. It's quite a subtle pattern. Again, for handy comparison with the Arch cold pressed paper, the texture here is finer in the sense of individual indents are smaller and closer together, while here it's a bit more spread out. For the Hanemühle one, less deep. very much looking forward to using this, as I think it might scan nicer than the Arch cold pressed. When I especially want to create prints on already textured paper, that can kind of get in the way a bit. So I quite like that this is more subtle. You'll definitely see all of these show up in future art vlogs. I can already say that I like the bamboo paper. It feels very pleasant to work on. I haven't done a paper art haul in quite a while, so this feels kind of weird. I so relied on just using up the one paper I had. I finally splurged and got a big Arch oil paper. Just in case you're new to my channel, I am not an oil painter. I use acrylics, but I've used this oil painting paper with acrylics to test out how that works and found the texture incredibly pleasant to work on. And for me, painting on a paper like this, or kind of similar, also watercolor papers with a medium like acrylics, creates a nice middle point between painting on very harsh gesso panels with completely smooth surfaces, or cotton or linen canvas on the other end of that spectrum of texture. So yeah, I saw that this one was on sale at the Korean art store and had to just splurge on it. I'll probably mount this paper on a panel, though I've heard from artist friends that this is also perfectly wonderful to just paint on unstretched. The texture, now that I see it, is actually strikingly similar to the Hanemühle cold pressed watercolor paper in that it has a bit of an uneven press pattern with some fiber strokes that even remind me of the agave paper. I found this texture to be very beautiful, even in the smaller format. The entire point about this paper is that you can paint on it with oil paints without needing additional gesso coating. Generally with acrylics, I can't go wrong when I pick specific oil painting surfaces. If you can find the little sample booklets, I hope you give them a try, because they also come for all their watercolor papers, and it's worth it to kind of get a feel for which paper works with your art style and your painting process. So today we have this new blank space, and I just want to show you how I go about brainstorming and creating a new composition. I did some quick test layouts here, as I suddenly had this quite concrete idea of visualizing her cut off hair falling away as if they were wings. I haven't participated in any art contests that require the creation of a dedicated painting. Usually I just submit work I already have finished. But here I'm happy to make an exception. It sounds like an amazing opportunity for practice, and I admire the Folio Society editions a lot. So while this art vlog is already on the longer side, maybe you too want to create a piece inspired by Rapunzel for this contest. So I thought I'd include it here. There's still time, and I think this particular fairy tale lends itself to minimalist, symbolic illustrations really well. So I'm hopeful I can squeeze this one in during the next few weeks. I'd read the story and wrote down some quotes that I liked, and then let this one rest for a few days at first, as that inspiration really didn't strike. I kept turning over different tower and hair options in my head, rotating them like in the microwave, but couldn't find anything that grabbed me, that I wanted to explore further and actually paint. But at some point, no matter how slow and deliberate you are, you just have to jump in and start doodling. I have to be very honest, the story doesn't resonate with me that much at a first read. I was familiar with the tale overall, but it's just not one of my favorites. And so I had to sit with that for a while and think about, do I want to draw something, even if it's for a contest and a great challenge to learn more? Do I want to draw something if I don't resonate with it, right? If there's no personal connection, and how can I create that personal connection? Is there an interpretation in there that I enjoy? Sketchbook pages like this one look messy and boring, but often they are the most important. This is where I solve problems, so I don't start paintings I then want to abandon halfway. This is where, for me, that kiss of the muse happens. only it comes after chatting with her, getting to know her, and going on dates. Sorry for that terrible metaphor, but I think it applies quite well. I like the visual of the tower bisecting the image, cutting Rapunzel off from her old life. I'm trying to also match it to where her hair is cut off, so it's a lot of minute changes in these sketches. These are all about the bare minimum. What format works best, where and how large do I place the figure and the tower, and how are light and dark arranged. Everything else can come afterwards, after that foundation has been laid. This Rapunzel contest illustration is the one I had that intrusive thought about. Is it worth it to participate if I don't film the process? I've thought about it while filming these sketches and believe that since it's a simpler illustration on a smaller format and with a clear deadline, filming it will feel more natural. It's the larger personal projects that drag on for weeks or months that are the hardest to film and wrangle into a cohesive video after all. But we'll see how it feels while working on it. I haven't yet found the answer for this whole filming and editing question that I had been asking myself. These videos and my art channel have opened so many opportunities for me and have given me a lot of freedom when it comes to pursuing personal projects. But it comes with that trade-off of those private, personal projects maybe feeling slightly less private. I think there's a separate learning process going on, separate from the craft of painting and even the craft of filming, about time management and learning how to pick and choose what parts of my process are truly essential. Thank you so much for watching, for all the support, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts about the whole documentation and filming for social media when it comes to an art process. I've got some fun travel sketchbook sessions and oil pastel experiments coming up over the next week, so I hope to see you again in my next art videos. Thank you so much for watching.